You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. It is July 22nd, 2021 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. This is Meditation and Attachment, the Deepening Your Practice class. And we've been going through the progress of insight, which I like to do in the summer. I thought that tonight I would talk about the ninth and 10th stages of that, which is the desire to be delivered from suffering, and then reobservation. What you notice about the progress of insight in that particular map is that it comes back over and over again to the three marks of the three characteristics: anatta, anicca, and dukkha, not self, impermanence, and suffering. Is often the translation. Shinzen, one of my teachers, often uses the translation of unsatisfactoriness, and Dan Brown, another of my teachers, uses the translation reactivity. One of the things about being in the human form is that we have these capacities to sense things, and if they encounter an object, there's a reaction to it. What I like about Dan's formulation of reactivity is that even if you purify everything, you still have this human body that you inhabit, and it still reacts each time a sense object hits the capacity to sense it. The desire to be delivered from suffering is this deep desire that comes from seeing clearly the nature of these three marks of existence, and the reluctance to accept them in the sense that they are. If you cling to or desire the sense of self to be solid in any way, or ongoing in any way, or in need of defense in any way, there's an origin of suffering that arises from that. And so when we talk about the desire to be free of that, what we're talking about is the desire to be free from requiring some sense of solid self. In impermanence, the desire to be free from suffering comes from really understanding that nothing is solid, nothing is lasting, nothing is permanent, nothing is countable, honorable. And then the last is this human body that we're in that grows old, gets sick, and dies. It's interesting. I had dinner on Monday night with somebody who just celebrated their 70th birthday. I met them when they were in their mid-20s, and I've watched them age all the way through this. And it was interesting talking. It becomes undeniable when you get past your late 60s, it seems, because the rate of aging accelerates in a way that it hasn't really before. And you look quite differently. Even to yourself, you look differently. There's an amazing elastic capacity to view yourself as not really aging very much, but at a certain point you fall off a cliff of aging. That's impossible. Wait a minute. Not only do I not look 25 anymore, I don't even look 65 anymore. It's hilarious in a way. And what he was talking about was, what is the point of all of this? He says, and he's a novelist, and we were talking about his new book, which sounded absolutely riveting, and he looked at me and he said, "Why am I even doing this? I mean, what's going to happen? I'll put out a novel, and then there'll be another novel, and then where is that sense of meaningfulness that comes from the activity of this life? And I thought of the desire to be delivered from suffering in that clinging to this idea that what will I leave behind? What will I have done that changed the nature of the world and maybe allowed me to be remembered? That just popped into my mind when my mother was dying. This was quite a long time ago, in the late 80s. She said, "I want to ask you something." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I want you to remember me." I thought it was very touching. That really her fear was that not even her children would remember her. And she was somebody who had a lot of striving for position, a lot of striving uh, for awards. So if none of that is going to matter, what does then matter? What is it? What is the purpose of this then? To see the nature of being alive and to move toward this deep understanding, which is what reobservation is, right? Knowledge of the miseries, 6, 7, and 8 in the map, uh, understanding that there is no solid, continuous, ongoing sense of self, and the fearfulness that might arise from that if you have a lot of identification with it, a lot of attachment to who you are. 7 is misery, or this sadness that arises when you really touch into the nature of everything being impermanent and insubstantial. And then 9 is the aspect of dukkha. You live in a body that will grow old and sick and die, and sometimes you get what you want, but it doesn't last. Sometimes you can't get what you want. Sometimes you have to put up with things that you don't want. I always thought of it as a falling into this stream that pulls you out of that, grasping toward all of that having some kind of meaningfulness that was lasting. And that puts you into this place of actually seeing that you inhabit this place of the present moment, and that's actually what's happening. I was studying with Dan this afternoon, doing the ideal parent figure work, and what's so interesting about being with him, because he inhabits the present moment so completely, is that when you think that you understand that there are hard and fast rules, he demonstrates over and over again that there aren't them. They don't really exist. And that actually you have to be led from the conditions of the present moment into the next moment, into the next moment, into the next moment. And everything is in flow around that. So that one of the things that I understood as one of the mechanisms of the ideal parent figure protocol, which is, without going too deeply into it, um, it's a indirect trauma reprocessing system, is that you don't go into the trauma. And yet one of the students that we were listening to a recording of their interview went right into the trauma, and that was quite interesting. And he again reaffirmed that you're led into the next moment from this moment, and you have to go with that. You can't impose on it something different than that. Oops. So time for a new chair, another impermanence. There we are. So in each moment, you see each moment arising, and you understand the conditions of each moment, and you formulate your intention and action based on these arisings in each moment, and you move forward from them without any fixation, without any rigidness. And what does that mean then in terms of what you accumulate, what you make for yourself, how you take care of yourself? How do you take care of others in that? Is that making sense, that understanding of things? Just this constant flow, constant attention to what's happening, constant response to what's happening and not to the working models or the ideas that you have about what it should be. So when you look in the Manual of Insight, for instance, there's these checklists of it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. When you look at the sense of self, there's a list of 25 things that the self is not. When you look at impermanence, there's another list there. When you look at that, the body. We live in a pandemic at the moment. Have you noticed that? And there is an agreement about that in some circles, and not so much of an agreement in the same way in other circles. How do you then, in LA, for instance, where I live, we opened up on June 15th. It's now a month later, and there's a spike that's filling the hospitals again with people who have got COVID. So it's clearly not over. The rate of vaccination here is falling, not rising. And yet we have, about 50% vaccinated. And so there won't be enough for herd immunity. I always find herd immunity to be kind of funny because we're not herd animals, we're pack animals. We're the apex predator, we're not prey, right? And yet we love to use these terms that describe ourselves as these docile creatures when actually in our wake is just a path of utter destruction wherever we go.
George, don't you know the saying, herd animals herd animals?
No, can you explain it?
That's just a really great pun, the greatest form of comedy.
Herd animals?
Yeah, herd animals herd animals.
Hurt animals.
Yeah.
Yes.
It builds on the hurt people hurt people. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. That's true. How did we get hurt? Then this, of course, brings up attachment and attachment conditioning as one way of examining it. Good enough care leads to secure functioning, and not good enough care leads to not secure functioning, and love is a different topic, which is an interesting thing, because we often think, I love my children, I would do anything for them. But it really is about the care that you provide, not whether you love them or not. I just got an AAI back from somebody I did. It was just a barren household in terms of love. And it was very rigid and very role defined, and children were expected to perform in a particular way. And even though the outcome was not prototypical security, it was security with some preoccupation around having to perform in the way that you were expected to perform, which I thought was quite interesting, because it was so clearly a loveless household. And yet you often see the reverse of that in AAIs or adult attachment interviews, where it's quite a loving household, but the care is really inconsistent and poor. And so the children become disorganized as a result of that, even though there were high loving scores. it's quite predictable in a way, this human condition. So I think that in some sense this points to the question of meaningfulness. How do we find a way of being in the world which provides us with meaning so that this present moment, these activities that we engage in, lead us to something that we find valuable in doing? Because we procreate, often that experience is with children, but also you could do something else that you wanted to do. Um, what is it that's meaningful to you? Not in the sense that it's valuable or rewarded in our culture, but actually in your experience of doing it, it's meaningful. So that um, I like to call a primary exploration, where the activity of doing it is where the meaning is derived, whereas a secondary exploration would be pursuing something that gave you the resources so that you could then pursue a primary exploration. Um, Not something necessarily that you do all of the time, but in each day, there's a period of time, maybe a couple of hours or 3 hours, where you're engaged in an activity that in the activity itself is what provides meaningfulness, something that is motivating for you to continue on with this difficult life. So then what is it, Christian?
So your novelist friend, is he reaching some kind of inevitable meaninglessness, or is that not inevitable?
Well, I would say from the description that the novel, the creation of the novel was actually a secondary exploration. That the meaningfulness of creating the novel was not what he was trying to get at. What he was trying to get at was a kind of recognition or accolade from writing the novel, and that his previous two books had not produced that, and that he was concerned once again that this book would not do that. Um, and so that I think is a good illustration of that idea. Do you do the thing so that you can get something from doing it, or do you do the thing because the thing itself is where you derive the meaning? And how do you organize your life in such a way that you have the time, energy, and resources to engage in the primary exploration, even if the activity that you find meaningful isn't rewarded in our culture as something that's valuable and remunerated? Is that making sense? I like to write my books, but my books are, sort of great big things that, reasonably will take you 6 months to get through, which is not a fun read before you go to bed, right? I mean, and it takes me a long time to make them, and everything is very particular. And I derive the meaning out of making the book, not what happens to it after I finish making it. It's just in the world, and the world can do whatever the world does. It's probably not distracting. So another way to say not popular. It's one of the things, have you noticed about meditation? If you do it in a deep way, it brings you into contact with all sorts of things that are sometimes challenging to deal with, and it frees you from the harder pieces. If you do it in a way that's organized around that, but it's often advertised as a stress reducer or as a happiness maker, a lifestyle additive. So we need to turn inward toward ourselves, toward this exploration of what it is that we really cling to, what is it that we hold on to about the experience of self and about the kind of life that we want for ourselves. We need to turn into this understanding that this life is very temporary and there really is no later. You need to do these things now. And then in each moment as it arises, we see clearly that this is actually not different than it's ever been. It's always been like this. And that those constructions that we've made about who we are and our nature and how our lives have to be in order for us to find fulfillment, all of that actually is the illusion that we can stay young or that we can live forever, or at least until we're 130. I remember my grandmother, one of the last times I visited her, walked into the room and looked around and said, "I'm sure God has a plan for me. I just wish he'd let me in on it." Because she was 97. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I don't really know anybody." I said, "Well, you have lots of friends." And she says, "Oh, those people, I've only known those people 10 years. I used to know people 70 years," which is in some sense like my friend Tom, who I met in New York in the early 80s. One of the other things I thought was so interesting is I remembered meeting him. We met at a dinner party at our friend Dara Park's house. Dara Park lived in a brownstone in Chelsea. I don't know if you know Manhattan at all. Row houses essentially that used to be single family homes that were then divided up into apartments, and he lived on the ground floor of one of these buildings on 22nd between 9th and 10th. But Tom remembered everybody was at the dinner party. I just remembered it was at Dara's house, and he remembered every single person at the dinner party, and really was able to create it in a different way than my mind tended to remember it, which was interesting. I do remember that we walked to the subway after the party, and we were there and on in the 23rd and 7th Avenue station. So there is this assembling of the idea about the nature of our lives and what happened and the directions that we took. And there's a kind of weight to that, a kind of meaningfulness to that. Even though the version in my memory and the version in Tom's memory were quite different in terms of what actually happened. So we couldn't say that in that moment of remembering, either description was what happened. I'm beginning to understand that you take in what's happening based on your preferences, your hierarchy, the things that interest you, and you create this working model of what that is. And then you remember that, not what happens. You remember what it means to you, not what happens. And then each time you remember it, the remembering it of it is remembered. And so you have these copies, these copies, these copies. So this memory that I've remembered many, many times is now completely altered by a single conversation with somebody else, bringing a memory of that, and with no surety at all that either version of that was anything more than what it meant to each of us in that moment. I was quite curious about. Tom worked for a poet, and I was quite curious about the life of the poet, because I loved the poetry that he wrote. And so it was fascinating for me to hear about the personality of the poet and compare it in my mind to what he had written and what I had made out of what he had written. None of which may be why he wrote it or what he intended, because that isn't really how it works. So then, how do you get your bearings in this flow of energy and information and understanding? And how do you then turn your attention toward things that matter to you? So that's really this focus, I think. The desire to be free of suffering, the desire to be free of illusion, the desire to be free of these constructions that may or may not be accurate, and moving into this constant experience of the present moment arising and passing, and adjusting based on that process of taking in what's actually happening. A lot of the source of suffering happens because you have this intention, this idea of what it needs to be, and then the present moment unfolds in a way that was not what you had anticipated, and you cling on to the experience that you wanted and suffer that it didn't happen, rather than go into what is actually happening and pivot and move with that flow of what's happening. This is in some sense a discussion around karma. I periodically question Dan about this. If you live an ethical life and you take care in your intention and action, can you reasonably expect what happens to be good karma, even if it isn't what you want to have happen? And he has always answered that, yes, you can reasonably expect what happens to be good karma. And so the adjustment is always around, this isn't what I thought was going to happen, this isn't what I wanted to happen, but this is what's happening. And because I'm fastidious about maintaining an ethical stance in the world, I can assume in this moment that what is happening is actually good and useful, and I can adjust my despair or distress around it not being what I had wanted to happen, and go with what is happening. And so in each moment you take in the data, so the capacity to sense meets the object that can be sensed. Consciousness of that sensing experience arises. It's compared or processed for urgency. Vedana is the Pali word, sometimes feeling tone. Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? But I really think it means, does it need urgent attention? Does it not matter whether we attend to it? Or if there's time, can we have some pleasant experience? It's then compared to the perceptual database, and the meaning that's in the perceptual database is then assigned to this undifferentiated, unfixating sensing experience. It attaches to it in the Buddhist sense of the word, and then the ultimate sensing experience transforms into conceptual reality. And if the mind is clear, it's a pretty good reflection of what's happening. If the mind is distorted, it's a distorted perception of what's happening. And then you gather the data of that and go through the process again each time. Included in that process is understanding what's happening, forming the intention for your response to it, and then taking the action in response to what's happening, and then taking in what happens when you make that action in the world. If you're constantly in that flow of the present moment, that movement, if you notice the fixations, the natures of conceptual reality as a kind of splash of solidness, and you're staying mostly in that flow, that movement, you're constantly just moving with the flow of what's actually happening, and the resistances, the grabs, the solidness doesn't coalesce into suffering. So, having heard that description, where are you in your practice? How well could you do that? Or do you notice that some things are quite sticky and you just grab right onto them? And then the nature of suffering. Early on, of course, in seeing that the self is not substantial, you make the shift out of identification with the sense of self into awareness. Awareness is fairly constant. There's a few experiences where it isn't deep sleep for one, or if you're anesthesiology, or if you're a fan of propofol or something, you don't have that. You would have those moments of no consciousness. But the selfing activity comes and goes, and it can be quite painful to get stuck in it. It doesn't happen to me so much anymore, but when it does, it's quite shocking how intense the capacity for the experience of being trapped in self can cause. So that fixation, all flowing along, arising and passing, not grabbing. So if you can come into that place, then the question of meaningfulness is resolved, but not necessarily to the satisfaction of self. I notice, particularly doing some of these vision practices that I've been sitting with. Dan's book on it is called The Six Lamps. In that moment of just being in that movement of being alive, the depth of contentment is really deep, and all of the distressing things that or all of the things that I mentioned that might be distressing when they're considered from the perspective of self are not that. But then when I come out of it, I notice that myself is not understanding why that is, and that in itself is distressing to the self experience. Why should that dopey meditation technique produce such a sense of contentment when essentially I'm just sitting in a chair and nothing around me has changed in any way that's calculable by the selfing experience. And so that's that coming and going, maybe shifting or stabilizing more and more in that perspective. Is that all making sense, at least? Getting a sense of it, Harley?
what Dan talks about and you're talking about with awakened awareness or natural awareness, it almost, it's so challenging, George, for me to take that beyond that meditation window. And then, I move from that state, choiceless awareness, going into natural awareness. And there is that sense of something so much more than the little me.
Right.
And, sometimes I'm able to take it out into the world, but there's so much grab.
Right.
So how much, how do I become an architect of my intentions and actions that is tied back to that natural awareness rather than all of the grab that I normally experience?
So what I might suggest is that you pay attention to how you come into it. So in the formal practice, pay attention to how you come into that awakened awareness. And then when you notice that the grab is there, you turn intentionally toward trying to reactivate the awakened awareness. And so that, because it happens pretty easily. I remember Dan telling the story of his teacher telling him that he had awakened awareness, and now what he needed to do was maintain it continuously while he was working. And so he had him sit in the doorway of his office, his teacher's office, and control the flow of people inside and out with the ask that he maintain awakened awareness continuously while he was doing it. And so that becomes the idea. How then, what, if you listen to his guidances, he'll take you through this quick series of steps that you can use to activate the awakened awareness, and then try and extend it as long as you can. And if it falls away, just reset it up over and over again until you can stretch it out longer and longer. I was sitting outside today. Normally, when I do the practice, I sit in front of a white wall because it's easier to see the visualizations there. Then it was such a nice afternoon, I thought I would sit outside and I just used the sky. Big Sky is a different meditation than what I was doing. It just exploded with this firefly effect, which was really quite interesting. But it had so much grab, the firefly effect, that I couldn't move beyond it. It was hilarious. So I certainly feel you on that one. And so the idea is just to understand, well, that happened. Now I'm setting it up again as many times as necessary with no critical function of self limiting.
Thanks, George.
Someone else? Carol?
So I followed that process of you're having the direct experience, and then that process where meaning is assigned,
Right.
and then there's a sort of a distillation of a conceptual reality, and then the grab that goes with that.
Right.
So you've fallen out of the view or awareness. But how, and I think it's ironic because for so many years you've led these workshops on a meaningful life. How is the question of meaningfulness then resolved if it's just almost like a projection and of your own stuff that causes this conceptualization? I mean, I guess where's the freedom in that?
Exactly. As you were saying that, the thing that I find the most meaningful is being good at taking care of people that I love. And so I'd like to get good at that. Understanding that in order for that to work, you need to take care of them in a way that's meaningful to them. So somebody sent me a text today that said, this COVID thing is getting out of hand. You need to take care of yourself. And my first thought was, I'm a bigger chicken than you are about this. I'm actually probably too constricted about it. But I didn't think that that would be a good way to take care of them. And what they were reaching out to me was an expression of affection and desire for my well-being. And so I just wrote back, thank you, thank you. Yes, happily willing to take extra care. Is that making sense?
What's meaningful then is perhaps what's of greatest wholesome value to you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And then how do you spend more and more of your time engaged in that?
Well, even the inventory of, going through, well, what is, what is it that, I mean, what's the measure? How did you come to taking care of people I love? You said that's meaningful to you. Is it some sense of satisfaction, or what is it that?
The experience of doing it.
So maybe you feel like you're home when you're doing that. You like that's.
It really engages me.
Yeah.
Christian.
So what's the interface of the self and the not self in engaging in that meaningful activity?
The disengagement of the sense of self in interpreting the response as a way that's meant to be satisfying to my own self experience.
But is it both the self, the sense of self, and just the pure awareness that knows that this is a meaningful activity for you, or is it really coming out of the sense of self? Or
I think that it's a whole activity, so both self and not self. We know, for instance, the activity of the unconscious through the conscious experience of that. In each moment, in each activity, in each thing you do, what is the motivation for doing it? Is it the activity itself, or are you hoping to get something out of doing it? And can you move more and more in the direction of the activity itself is what is valuable? And then what is that? It can be anything, right? So it's not, there isn't a list that you need to learn. It's really based on the totality of your conditioning and how you respond to it. This is a meditation class, so we should probably do some meditation. How's that? Kind of inclined toward doing.
What time does the class end? I'm sorry.
Around 9.
Oh, okay.
So I'm inclined in this moment to do some metta practice. So easy, either for an easy person or for self. So go ahead and take your, meditation posture. So how did that go? Good enough?
Excellent, really. I liked how you emphasized that it's the meta is or a view. Um, my mind adapted well to that.
Good. Someone else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around metta as a view. The way I've done metta in the past is relied on visualizations and body sensations.
Right.
And so I was hearing what you were saying about how you used your experience with anger to figure out what a view means or what it is. And so during this meditation, something happened in my house that made me a little afraid, more like alarmed. And so I was trying to use that to question what a view is. And the only thing I could really identify is body sensation.
So that's an emotion? The emotion of fear in the body?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. So there's the cognitive understanding of what an emotion is, and then there's the felt sense of the emotion in the body. You felt a sensation in the body and you identified that sensation as fear. What was the process of identifying it cognitively? How did you know that?
Because of the thoughts that were crossing my mind, I think, of bad things that would happen.
Right. So conceptual reality was forming, and part of conceptual reality was the emotion. The other part was the interpretation of the sensations of the present moment in a particular way. Between ultimate reality and conceptual reality is the place where views are, and it changes the way that ultimate reality is converted into conceptual reality. Did you notice that the mind was neutral in that moment, or that it was inclined in a particular direction that might have had a distorting effect? You don't have to have an answer to this. Really what I'm trying to describe is the exploration to discover this. But maybe you do have an answer. Were you correct in your interpretation of what was happening?
No.
So then there was a mind state that distorted it from what was actually happening into something frightening. So maybe that was the mind state of fearfulness.
Yeah.
So then.
And so what you're saying, sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess what I had thought so far is that you could identify that view by either the body sensation or the resulting conceptual reality. And what you're saying is you can identify not only the result or the body sensation, but the thing itself that changes it.
Right. And then you make that thing that changes it the object of meditation. Because if you can hold the view of loving kindness, what you'll notice is that conceptual reality becomes more and more beautiful because of that. And then you learn about the nature of views and the distortion of conceptual reality. It's a way of inclining the mind out of suffering states into positive states, intentional positivity.
But you're not focusing. The object of concentration is not the resulting beauty of your conceptual reality.
No.
Is that
That's
previous to that?
right.
Ah.
Good.
Can you give me?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Are there any pointers that you can suggest to me so that I can start being able to focus on that better?
Well, views tend to be up in sort of the top of the head, sort of around the eyes, out. That's kind of how we normally conceptualize them. People do report them in other places, but that's the most common. So it's an intentional coming out of the body into the experience of the mind so that you don't get distracted by the intensity of the sensations in the body. And then noticing, really the beginning part of the exploration is about what a view is, really. The mind is equanimous. It's a pretty straightforward conversion of ultimate reality into conceptual reality. And if the mind has a view in there, there's a strong distortion which you want to see if you can begin to identify. Don't fret too much. Just explore and see what happens.
Okay. Is sleep a view? Because I think I've identified that, like
Sleep or sleepiness?
Sleepiness.
Yes, it can be.
Sorry again.
It can be, yeah. Sloth and torpor, we call it.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Good.
thank you.
So we have decided to do the retreat in person this year, and we are going to put it up on the website. The question is, how bad is the Delta variant going to be, and can we really do it? But worst comes to worst, we will simply do the retreat virtually and refund the hotel fee. We've divided it up for that purpose into a hotel fee and a retreat fee, so that when it gets posted, you'll be able to see it. The in-person retreats are going to be limited to 16 people so that we can keep a little bit of distance that might be helpful. We have a level 2 class starting in September, which is beginning to fill up. If you're interested in that, take a look at that. It's on the website. Saturday is the second day of the current level 1 series. There'll be 2 more after that, and every other week. And that's everything that's happening through the end of the year. I do offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that you'll make a donation to support myself and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. You can find a link to make a donation on the website. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you soon somewhere on the path. Bye.
Thank you, George.
Bye.